Good morning, everyone. My name is Adam Livingston, and I am the Bitcoin Wizard. Today, I want to go down the rabbit hole of the unconscious so you can understand Bitcoin on a more primal and visceral level. Carl Gustav Jung believed what truly shapes the fate of civilizations isn't the passing of laws, or the movements of armies, or the rise and fall of markets, it's the state of the human psyche. The unconscious mind is the real battlefield of history, and on that battlefield, the most dangerous weapon is not the sword or the rifle or the nuclear warhead, it is unconsciousness itself. Unconsciousness is the great enabler of tyranny. It's what allows millions to quietly hand over their freedom without a single drop of blood spilled. Jung warns that if people do not become conscious of the forces moving them, those forces will control their destiny, and they will call it fate. Today, we live in a monetary system that doesn't just sit in the background of our lives, it defines our perception of value, time, and possibility. Fiat money is not simply a neutral medium of exchange, it is a psychological architecture that shapes the archetypes we inhabit. It conditions the psyche into what I call the compliant subject, a role defined by dependency, obedience, and the outsourcing of responsibility to unseen authorities. Fiat money thrives on unconscious because unconscious people cannot see the theft of their time through inflation. They cannot see that every unit of currency they hold is a silent claim on their labor, decaying in value, pulling the hours of their life into pockets of the few who control the printing press. Fiat doesn't just drain your bank account, it drains the very foundation of your sovereignty. Bitcoin is the opposing archetype. It is the sovereign rebel, and unlike the compliant subject, this archetype cannot be summoned by decree. It must be chosen. Bitcoin is incorruptible, decentralized, and immune to coercion. But more importantly, it requires you to wake up. There is no central authority to bail you out if you lose your keys, no banker to reverse a transaction, no paternal figure to fix your mistakes. You are forced into conscious relationship with your own wealth, your own time, and your own errors. And in that direct confrontation with responsibility, the self begins to awaken. This is the archetype of liberation. Jung mapped it in the psyche, Bitcoin renders it in math. This union between depth psychology and incorruptible code is the re-emergence of an ancient myth in modern form. The myth of the free individual standing apart from the herd, mastering both the outer world and the inner shadow. In this presentation, I will walk through how Bitcoin is the living, breathing digital incarnation. Carl Jung did not see the great disasters of history as mere accidents of politics or economics. He saw them as eruptions of the collective unconscious, psychic forces bubbling up from the depths, taking possession of entire nations. In this view, humanity's greatest threat was not external at all, it was internal. So, what is unconsciousness? It's the state in which you are being moved by forces you cannot name. You believe decisions are your own, yet they are being scripted by invisible assumptions, cultural conditioning, and collective fears. It is the fish swimming in poisoned water who has never once questioned what water is. It is the oxygen of our economic life, yet almost no one can explain how it works, or more importantly, how it fails. The majority of people live entire lives without realizing that the money in their pocket is designed to decay, that their savings are quietly confiscated through inflation, that the expansion of the money supply transfers their time, labor, and their future into the hands of those who control the issuance. This ignorance is not accidental. Fiat money survives by keeping its subjects totally unconscious. If every citizen truly understood that inflation is legalized theft, the system would collapse overnight. So instead, it distracts. It rewards short-term consumption. It drowns awareness in a flood of cheap credit, mass entertainment, and constant urgency. Jung warned that same unconsciousness on a mass scale always invites the same fate. submission to an archetype of control, a tyrant, a party, a system that promises order at the cost of freedom. Once that archetype takes hold, it becomes self-reinforcing. The more dependent the people become, the less they can imagine life outside its grip. Bitcoin breaks this cycle by forcing awareness into the open. It demands that you ask questions you have been trained to never ask. What is money? Who decides its value? Why do I trust it? And most importantly, what happens when I stop? The greatest danger is unconsciousness. The greatest defense is awakening. And Bitcoin, whether you entered it for profit or principle, will, if you stay with it long enough, drag you toward consciousness. You may resist it, but you cannot avoid it. Jung taught that beneath our individual personalities lies something far older, the collective unconscious, a vast storehouse of symbols, images, and behavioral patterns that have guided human life since the beginning. These are the archetypes. They are not invented by culture, they are inherited by it. They live in us as deeply as bone and blood. Fiat money does not merely facilitate trade, it calls forth a specific archetype from the human psyche, like I said, the compliant subject. The figure who obeys without reflection, who exchanges freedom for comfort, who lives in a perpetual state of financial dependency. The compliant subject is docile because their survival is tethered to the system that issues their lifeblood, the currency. This archetype thrives in environments of inflation, debt, and managed scarcity. It accepts the steady erosion of its sovereignty as the cost of belonging to the herd of sheep. The sovereign rebel does not seek permission to act. They stand apart from the herd not for the sake of rebellion alone, but because they recognize the source of their autonomy lies outside the reach of centralized control. The sovereign rebel accepts the burden of self-responsibility, knowing there is no lender of last resort to cushion their mistakes. This archetype values resilience over comfort and truth over convenience. Now, I know I love to speak in metaphor, but these are not metaphors. They are living psychic forces. Every human life is shaped by the archetype they inhabit, whether they realize it or not. The compliant subject and the sovereign rebel do not coexist peacefully. They are antagonists. The rise of one comes at the expense of the other, and every act you take with your money is a vote for which archetype you will embody. Jung would remind us you do not choose an archetype intellectually, you live into it through your actions. If your daily habits reflect sovereignty, securing your keys, understanding the protocol, refusing inflationary theft, then the sovereign rebel takes root. History is now staging a psychic confrontation between these two archetypes at a global scale. This is not just about markets, folks. This is about which pattern of human being will dominate the next century. Jung defined the shadow as the totality of all that we reject, deny, or repress about ourselves. It is the dark counterpart of the persona that we show the world. The shadow contains the instincts we disown, the desires we fear, and the impulses we have been taught to hide. It is not evil by definition, but left unexamined, it will rule us from the dark. Fiat systems are designed to help you avoid the shadow. They make it possible to outsource responsibility for the darker aspects of human nature, greed, control, manipulation, onto somebody else. The corrupt bankers, the greedy politicians, the elites. The narrative is simple. They're bad and we are good. We get to keep our hands clean while blaming a centralized villain for the conditions that we accept. But Bitcoin destroys this illusion entirely. When you step into self-custody, there is nobody to blame but yourself. If you lose your keys, that's on you. If you send coins to the wrong address, it's on you. If you panic sell in fear, it's on you. There is no call center, no resource, no parental figure to restore what you lost. In Bitcoin, you are the bank, and that means you are the perpetrator and the protector. This is where the shadow emerges. The sovereign rebel is not purely heroic. It carries within it the potential for recklessness, arrogance, and isolation. But it also contains the raw energy of independence, courage, and mastery. The challenge is not to suppress the dangerous parts, it is to integrate them, to channel them consciously. This is the work Jung called individuation. individuation. Jung considered the ultimate aim of life to be individuation, the process by which a human being becomes whole. It is the unification of the unconscious and the conscious into one single, unified, integrated self. Not the mask you wear, not the role society assigns you, but the complete, undivided reality of who you are. This process requires the rarest of resources: time to reflect, time to explore, time to fail and then rebuild. Without time, there is no space for the deep work of integrating the shadow or wrestling with your inner contradictions, of synthesizing your instincts and your reason in one harmonious whole. Time is the raw material from which the self is carved. Fiat money steals this raw material silently. Inflation erodes your savings year by year, forcing you to work longer and harder simply to stand still. The hours that you could have spent in creative work, in personal mastery, in deep relationships, they are traded away to pay for the privilege of holding a currency designed to decay. Most people never notice the theft. They feel the stress, the exhaustion, the sense of always chasing but never arriving, but they don't even seek its source. The system keeps them too busy to ask why they are busy. Bitcoin reverses this by holding an asset with a fixed supply and incorruptible rules. You anchor your stored labor outside the reach of inflationary theft. Over time, this stabilizes your relationship to work and consumption. The hamster wheel slows, the noise quiets. You begin to reclaim the hours that were being siphoned away unnoticed. And here is where Jung and Bitcoin meet most directly. The moment you regain time, you are faced with a question most people will never have to answer. What will you do with it? Will you fill it with distraction, or will you use it to build the self? Individuation is not a hobby. It is not self-improvement in the shallow sense. It is a lifelong project of inner integration, and it cannot begin until you are no longer a hostage to survival level scarcity. Bitcoin cannot individuate you, only you can do that. But it can remove the greatest obstacle in your way, the slow bleed of your time into a system that does not have your wholeness as its aim. In that sense, Bitcoin is an enabling condition for the deepest human work possible. Now remember, the collective unconscious is the inherited psychic reservoir of our species, a shared field of symbols, instincts, and mythic patterns. It is where the archetypes live. It is the ocean in which every human psyche swims. The health of this ocean is what matters. When it is clear, civilizations produce art, innovation, and spiritual depth. When it is polluted, civilizations produce propaganda, conformity, and psychic sickness. Fiat money is one of the most potent pollutants the collective unconscious has ever absorbed, because it distorts not only the stories we tell, but the very instincts that generate them. In the fiat world, the collective unconscious is saturated with the myth of endless consumption, the belief that growth can be conjured from debt, that value can be decreed from above rather than earned in reality. This myth infects the cultural imagination. It turns the hero archetype into the celebrity influencer, the wise elder into the political brand, and the sacred into the profitable. It erodes the moral and symbolic foundations upon which a culture stands. The danger is that individuals rarely notice this pollution directly. The collective unconscious shifts its patterns so subtly that a generation later, the abnormal becomes the new normal. Bitcoin enters this field like a spring of clear, incorruptible water. Its principles, scarcity, transparency, immutability, are not technical features. They are the psychological nutrients for humanity. They reintroduce stability and trust at the symbolic level, anchoring value to something real, something outside the arbitrary will of power. Over time, this changes the archetypes the culture calls forth. It encourages the sovereign rebel, the builder over the grifter, the steward over the exploiter. It restores the possibility of civilization whose shared psychic ocean is clean enough to support truth. To choose Bitcoin, then, is not only to change your personal relationship with money, it is to add one more drop of clear water into the collective ocean, and over enough time, drops become tides. This is why the future with the highest level of Bitcoin adoption is the future future that is most beautiful. Jung warns that the greatest catastrophes of human history were caused by psychic epidemics, moments when entire populations surrendered their individuality to the collective mind. In these states, people do not think, they do not question, they dissolve into the herd, and that is what we call mass psychosis. And it's not chaos as people commonly believe, it is order without consciousness. It is the totalitarian archetype manifesting itself with perfect efficiency. Every individual acting as a cell in a larger organism, believing that they are free while moving exactly as the collective dictates. Fiat systems cultivate this state deliberately. They teach conformity through monetary dependence. The population survival is tied to the currency, so dissent feels like self-destruction. Inflation creates urgency in short-term thinking, making deep reflection a luxury that few can afford. Debt shackles the imagination to repayment schedules. Mass media, funded by the same system, floods the psychic field with curated fears and manufactured desires. This is a society where people voluntarily enforce the norms that keep them powerless. The most effective prison is the one where prisoners guard themselves. Bitcoin is disruptive because it is not folded into this architecture of control. It doesn't reward obedience, it rewards understanding. The network thrives on individual nodes acting independently, verifying rather than trusting. This is an entirely different psychic pattern, one that resists the trance. When someone takes self-custody of Bitcoin, they experience a micro-break in the mass psychosis. They hold something outside of the herd's reach, and once you've stepped outside the group mind, even for a moment, you cannot fully return to it. That is the beginning of psychological sovereignty. Jung coined the term synchronicity to describe meaningful coincidences that cannot be explained by cause and effect alone. Events that seem orchestrated by an unseen order, as if the unconscious itself has intervened in the unfolding of reality. Bitcoin's emergence in January 2009 is one of the most profound synchronicities of our time. In the wake of the greatest financial crisis since the Great Depression, as trust in banks and governments reached a generational low, an anonymous figure released a fully formed alternative to the entire monetary system. Not a manifesto, not a protest, a functioning protocol, incorruptible by design. The timing was immaculate. Had Bitcoin released a few years earlier, the world would not have recognized its necessity. Years later, the crisis would have passed, the public lulled back into an unconscious trust. It arrived at the exact moment when the collective mind was cracked open just wide enough for a new archetype to slip through. Jung would not see this as invention but as intervention, the psyche of humanity under pressure from the corruption of fiat generating a symbolic and practical antidote. The code was the form, the deeper content was the myth. Here is money that has no king, no bank, and no empire that can corrupt it. Even Satoshi's disappearance fits the pattern in myth. The bringer of fire never stays to rule. Prometheus departs. The culture hero hands the gift to the tribe and vanishes, leaving them to prove that they are worthy of it. From this perspective, Bitcoin is not only a technological breakthrough, but a psychic event, a message from the deeper layers of the collective unconscious, delivered in precise form and at the precise moment needed to counter the dominant archetype of control. And like in all synchronicities, its meaning is not given. It is revealed in how we choose to respond. Ignore it and the moment passes. Engage with it and the trajectory of both the individual and the collective changes forever. This is where we weave every previous concept, unconsciousness, archetypes, the shadow, individuation, the collective unconscious, mass psychosis, and synchronicity into one unified, high-stakes conclusion. Jung taught that the fate of the world does not change through mass movements alone. It changes when individuals transform themselves, and that transformation ripples outward into the collective. The archetype of the sovereign rebel can only emerge in the world once it has emerged in you. Fiat keeps you from this transformation by stealing the raw materials that you desperately need to build yourself. time, responsibility, and truth. It encourages you to outsource blame, to conform to the herd, to trust the very system that exploits it. Fiat does not just rob you materially, it robs you psychologically, spiritually, and mythically. Bitcoin enables the condition for transformation. It returns your stolen time, it forces you to integrate your shadow through an uncompromising discipline of self-custody, it anchors your wealth and your value into incorruptible rules, restoring stability to your psyche and clarity to the collective unconscious. It resists the mass psychosis by rewarding independent verification over blind trust, and if you are willing, it inducts you into the myth of the liberator, the one who carries the fire back to the tribe. But here is the truth. Adopting Bitcoin without transforming yourself is nothing more than a change of costume. The inner work must match the outer act. You can hold the hardest money in history and still think like a fiat subject. You can still store your wealth in incorruptible code and sabotage yourself through fear, ignorance, and unconscious habit. Transformation is not in the adoption of Bitcoin alone, it is the adoption of a new way of being, awake, accountable, and integrated. Every individual that makes this transformation shifts the trajectory of the collective unconscious. Enough of these individuals and the archetype of the compliant subject collapses under its own weight. This is how civilizations change, not by decree, but by the quiet, relentless accumulation of sovereign minds. And that is why Bitcoin matters. That is why psychology matters. And that is why, in the deepest sense, they are the same project. The liberation of the human being from the inside out. My name is Adam Livingston, and I am the Bitcoin Wizard. If you enjoyed this content, please subscribe to the channel for more daily Bitcoin insights. Like the video for the algorithm so we can spread the orange gospel together, and leave a comment with what you would like me to comment on next. Have a terrific day. Class dismissed.